I think it's really important that we spend a lot of time thinking about the research methods that we use for learning design to help forward our digital learning practices as much as we possibly can. And I think when we look at it, it's important to realize that there's an awful lot of people involved in this that don't have a level of expertise that allow them to be able to understand the questions that they're being asked. So one of the research approaches, the quantitative research pros, we put together a tool that you send out and you get people to answer questions. And I think that generally speaking, when we do that, particularly in a research context or an educational context, we're sending it to people who have a depth of knowledge on the issue. Unfortunately, what happens if you send it to all the faculty at a given university, odds are still in most universities that most of those professors will not have a depth of knowledge around digital literacy, around digital practice, around digital pedagogy. So their answers then are often going to be answers that are the social answers they think they should give. They're going to be answers they think you want. And then too often I've seen those kinds of quantitative practices being used to make decisions that I don't think are necessarily forwarding us in a digital literacy perspective. So I think that from my perspective at this point, we really still are going out and doing the kind of deep, qualitative, story-based research that gives us a sense of where people are feeling with this. Because we're taking something that has been built in stone for, our university approaches to this have been built in stone for, 20 years, 50 years, 60 years, 150 years, depending on how you look at it. And there's an unlearning process that has to happen there. And I think that unlearning process is one that is best guided with somebody who can give you the language you need to explain what you're trying to explain. I find the same thing whenever you look at student evaluations. So one of the things that I try to do with student evaluations of faculty teaching, particularly when it comes around digital practice, is I try to sit with the students and talk them through the process so that basically I'm educating my audience with the language they need to make the kind of critiques they want to make. And the argument there is maybe I'm leading the witness and maybe my research is invalid because what I'm doing is guiding them down a particular path. I think that bias is certainly going to be there, but if you can educate your audience, if you can educate your research group to the point where they have the tools they need to be critical, and often I think your audience is going to be more critical after the process of engaging with them rather than less. I think that you're going to start to get deeper into understanding what's actually happening around digital practice. So much of what we have now is, did you do this? Did you do this? Did you do this? Did you do this? And it presumes a level of understanding that I just don't think is there. And I understand that people want to have a mixed methodology, and most people do at this point. Most of educational research looks like that. And I understand that it is very difficult to get research funding for qualitative research because it's very difficult to pull direct outcomes from it. And it's all true. At the same time, I still think that for us to understand what's happening in a teacher's head whenever they're trying to do digital practice. So I'll give you a simple example. The concept of fear when we look at digital practice, and I see this all the time. So from a student perspective, they're often very afraid of their material coming back to haunt them. So if you put your work out in public, is it going to be, misunderstood? Is it going to be used against you? Is someone you don't know going to be critical of you? Is it something that someone's going to steal? Is they going to take your work? Those are all really valid concerns that students have. It's very difficult to have a conversation about how someone is afraid in a quantitative instrument. And I think grading someone's fear scale is one of those things that's going to be, I'm going to go so far as saying invalid when you compare one person's fear scale against another person's fear scale. Because it's a perception of their understanding of a fear scale. And I think the same is true for teachers, because I think teachers have the same issue. They're afraid that maybe their colleague is going to see the way that they're teaching online, and that's something that they're really worried about because they don't want to be judged, particularly if you're in an environment where you're not doing a lot of co-teaching. Maybe you're afraid that your students are going to copy and paste your questions and put them into something and steal an answer, or go to a website like Brainly and use it to crowdsource answers to questions so they don't have to do real work. But those concerns are all real concerns, but they're ones that for most teachers, they've not spent a great deal of time thinking deeply about that. I mean, certainly some people have. But I think a qualitative approach, like a deeply qualitative approach, is really the only way we're going to get to that meat that I think is really still holding us back from a digital practice perspective.